Prologue. We should start back, Garrett urged as the woods began to grow dark around them. The wildlings are dead. Do the dead frighten you? Sir Waymar Royce asked, with just the hint of a smile. Garrett did not rise to the bait. He was an old man, past 50, and he had seen the lordlings come and go. Dead is dead, he said. We have no business with the dead. Are they dead? Royce asked softly. What proof have we? Will saw them, Garrett said. If he says they are dead, that's proof enough for me. Will had known they would drag him into the quarrel sooner or later. He wished it had been later rather than sooner. My mother told me that dead men sing no songs, he put in. My wet nurse said so, the same thing, Will, Royce replied. Never believe anything you hear at a woman's tit. There are things to be learned even from the dead. His voice echoed too loud in the twilit forest. We have a long ride before us, Garrett pointed out. 8 days, maybe 9, and night is falling. Sir Waymar Royce glanced at the sky with disinterest. It does that every day about this time. Are you unmanned by the dark, Garrett? Will could see the tightness around Garrett's mouth, the barely surprised anger in his eyes under the thick black hood of his cloak. Garrett had spent 40 years in the Night's Watch, man and boy, and he was not accustomed to being made light of. Yet it was more than that. Under the wounded pride, Will could sense something else in the older man. You could taste it, a nervous tension that came perilously close to fear. Will shared his unease. He had been 4 years on the wall. The first time he had been sent beyond, all the old stories had come rushing back, and his bowels had turned to water. He had laughed about it afterwards. He was a veteran of 100 ranges by now. And the endless dark wilderness that the sovereign called the Haunted Forest had no more terrors for him. Until tonight, something was different tonight. There was an edge to this darkness that made his hackles rise. 9 days they had been riding, north and northwest and then north again, further and further from the wall, hard on the track of a band of wildling raiders. Each day had been worse than the day that had come before it. Today was the worst of all. A cold wind was blowing out of the north, and it made the trees rustle like living things. All day, Will had felt as though something was watching him, something cold and implacable, that loved him not. Garrett had felt it too. Will wanted nothing so much as to ride hell-bent for the safety of the wall, but that was not a feeling to share with your commander, especially not a commander like this one. Sir Waymar Ross was the youngest son of an ancient house with too many heirs. He was a handsome youth of 18, grey-eyed and graceful and slender as a knife. Mounted on his huge black death stare, the knight towered above Will and Garrett on their smaller gearions. He wore black leather boots, black woolen pants, black moleskin gloves, and a fine, supple coat of gleaming black ringmail over the layers of black wool and boiled leather. Sir Waymar had been a sworn brother of the Night's Watch for less than half a year, but no one could say he was not prepared for his vocation. At least insofar as his wardrobe was concerned. His cloak was his crowning glory, sable, thick and black and soft as sin. Bet he killed them all himself, he did, Garrett told the barracks over wine. Trusted their little heads off, or mighty warrior. They all shared the laugh. It is hard to take orders from a man you laughed at in your cups. Will reflected as he sat shivering atop his garrion. Garrett must have felt the same. Mormont said as soon as we tracked them, and we did. Garrett said, they're dead. They shan't trouble us no more. There is hard riding before us. I don't like this weather. If it snows, we would be a fortnight getting back. And snow's the best we can hope for. Ever seen an ice storm, my lord? The lordling seemed to not hear him. He studied the deepening twilight in that half-bored, half-distracted way. Will had ridden with the knight long enough to understand it was best not to interrupt him when he looked like that. Tell me again what you saw, Will. All the details. Leave nothing out. Will's been a hunter before he joined the night watch. Well, a poacher in truth. Malister free riders had caught him red-handed in the Meister's wood, skinning one of Malister's own bucks. It had been a choice of putting on the black or losing a hand. No one could move for the woods as silent as Will, and it had not taken the black rowers long to discover his talent. The camp is 2 miles further on, over the ridge, hard beside a stream. Will said, I got close as I dared. There's 8 of them, men and women both, no children I could see. They put up a lean-to against the rock. The snow's pretty well covered it now, but I could still make it out. No fire burning, but the fire pit was still plain as day. No one was moving. I watched a long time. No living man ever lay so still. Did you see any blood? Well, no, Will admitted. Did you see any weapons? Some swords, a few bows. One man had an axe. Heavy looking, double-bladed. A cruel piece of iron. It was on the ground beside him, right by his hand. Did you note of the position of the bodies? A couple were sitting up against the rock, most of them on the ground, fallen like. Or sleeping, Royce suggested. Fallen, Will insisted. There's one woman up on an ironwood, half hid in the branches. A far eyes, he smiled thinly. I took care. She never saw me. When I got closer, I saw the woman wasn't moving neither, despite himself. He shivered. You have a chill, Royce asked. Some, Will muttered. The wind, my lord. The young knight turned back to his grizzled man-at-arms. Frost-fallen leaves whispered past him, and Royce deserter moved restfully. What do you think might have killed these men, Gard? Sir Waymer asked carefully. He adjusted the drape of his long sable cloak. It was cold, Gard said with iron certainty. I saw men freeze last winter, and the ones before, when I was half a boy. Everyone talks about snows 40 foot deep, and how the ice wind comes howling out of the north, but the real enemy is the cold. It steals up on your quieter than Will, and first you shiver, and your teeth clatter, and you stamp your feet and dream of mulled wine and nice hot fires. It burns, it does. Nothing burns like the cold. But only for a while. Then it gets inside you and starts to fill you up, and after a while you don't have the strength to find it. It's easier to sit down or go to sleep. They say you don't feel any pain towards the end. First you go weak and drowsy, and everything starts to fade. And then it's like sinking into a sea of warm milk, peaceful like. Such elegance, Gard, Sir Wilmer observed. I never suspected you had it in you. I've had the cold in me too, lordling. Gard pulled back his hood, giving Sir Wilmer a good look at the stumps where his ears had been. 2 ears, 3 toes, and the little finger off my left hand. I got off light. We found my brother frozen at his watch, with a smile on his face. Sir Waymer shrugged. You ought to dress more warmly, Gard. Gard glared at the lordling. The scar around his ear holes flushed red with anger, where Meister Aemond had cut his ears away. We'll see how warm you can dress when the winter comes. He pulled up his hood, hunched over his Garins, silent and solemn. If Garin said it was the cold, Will began. Have you drawn any watches this past week, Will? Yes, my lord. There never was a week when he did not draw a bloody dozen watches, was the man driving it. And how did you find the wall? Weeping, Will said, frowning. He saw it clear enough now that the lordling had pointed out. They couldn't have frozen. Not if the wall was weeping. It wasn't cold enough. Royce nodded. Bright lad. We had a few light frosts this past week, and a quick flurry of snow now and then, and surely no cold fierce enough to freeze 8 grown men clad in fur and leather. Let me remind you, with shelter near at hand and a means of making fire. The night smile was cocksure. Well, lead us there. I see these dead men for myself. And then there was nothing to be done for it, and the order hand giving, the honour bound them to obey. Wilson went in front, his shaggy little Garion picking the way carefully through the undergrowth. A light snow had fallen the night before, and there were stones and roots and hidden sinks lying just under its crust, waiting for the careless and unwary. Sir Waymer Royce came next, his great blank stare snorting impatiently. The war horse was the wrong mount for ranging, but try and tell that to the lordling. Gard brought up the rear. Old man-at-arms muttered to himself as he rode. Twilight deepened. The coldest sky turned a deep purple, the colour of an old bruised and faded to black. The stars began to come out, a half moon rose. Will was grateful for the light. We can make a better pace than this, surely, Royce said when the moon was full risen. Not with this horse, Will said. Fear had him insolent. Perhaps my lord would care to take the lead. Sir Waymar Royce did not deign to reply. Somewhere off in the wood a wolf howled. Will pulled his garrion over beneath an ancient gnarled ironwood and dismounted. Why are you stopping? Sir Waymar asked. Best to go the rest of the way on foot, my lord. It's just over that ridge. Royce paused a moment, staring off into the distance, his face reflective. A cold wind whispered through the trees. His great sable cloak stirred behind like something half alive. There's something wrong here, Garrett muttered. The young knight gave a disdainful smile. Is there? Can't you feel it? Garrett asked. Listen to the darkness. Will could feel it. 4 years in the night's watch, and he had never been so afraid. What was it? Wind. Trees lustling. A wolf? Which sound is it that unmans you so, Garrett? When Garrett did not answer, Royce slid gracefully from his saddle. He tied the destrier securely to a low-hanging limb, well away from the other horses, and drew his long sword from his sheath. Jewels glittered in its hilt, and the moonlight ran down the shining steel. It was a splendid weapon, castle forged and new made. From the look of it, Will doubted it ever been swung in anger. The trees pressed close here. That sword will tangle you up, my lord, better knife. If I need instruction, I will ask for it, the young lord said. Guard, stay here, guard the horses. Guard dismounted. We need a fire, I'll see to it. How big of a fool are you, old man? If there are enemies in this wood, the fire's the last thing we want. There's some enemies the fire will keep away, Garrett said. Bears and direwolves and other things. Sir Wymer's mouth became a hard line. No fire. Garrett's hood shadowed his face, but Will could see the hard glitter in his eyes as he stared at the night. For a moment he was afraid the older man would go for his sword. It was a short, ugly thing, its grips discoloured by sweat, its edges nicked from hard use, but Will would not have given an iron bob for a lordling's life if Garrett pulled it from its scabbard. Finally, Garrett looked down. No fire, he muttered, low under his breath. Royce took it for acquaintance and turned away. Lead on, he said to Will. Will threaded his way through a thicket and then stared up at the slope to the low ridge where he had found his vantage point under a sentinel tree. Under the thin crust of snow, the ground was damp and muddy, like footing with rocks hidden roots to trip you up. Will made no sound as he climbed behind him. He heard the soft metallic sliver of the lordling's ringmail, the rustle of leaves and muttered curses as reaching branches grabbed at his long sword and tugged on his splendid sable coat. The great sentinel was right there at the top of the ridge, where Will had known it would be, its lowest branch a bare foot off the ground. Will slid in underneath, flat on his belly in the snow and mud, and looked down on the empty clearing below. His heart stopped in his chest. For a moment he dared not breathe. Moonlight shone down on the clearing, the ashes on the fire pit, the snow-covered lean-to, the great lot, the little half-frozen stream, everything just as it had been hours ago. They were all gone. All the bodies were gone. Gods, he heard behind him. A sword slash of the branch as Sir Waymar Royce gained the ridge. He stood there beside the sentinel, long sword in hand, his cloak billowing behind him as the wind came up, altling nobly against the stars for all to see. Get down, Will whispered urgently. Something's wrong. Royce did not move. He looked down at the empty clearing and laughed. Your dead men seem to have moved, Will. Will's voice abandoned him. He groped for his sword and did not come. It was not possible. His eyes swept back and forth over the abandoned campsite, stopped on the axe, a huge double-bladed battle axe, still lying where he had seen it untouched, a valuable weapon. On your feet, sir, Will, Sir Waymar commanded. There's no one here. I won't have you hiding under a bush. Reluctantly, Will obeyed. Sir Waymar looked him over the open disapproval. I'm not going back to Castle Black a failure on my first ranging. We will find these men, he glanced around. Up the tree. Be quick about it. Look for fire. Will turned away wordless. There was no use to argue. The wind was moving. It cut through him. He went to the tree a vaulting green grease sentinel, and began to climb. Soon his hands were sticky with sap, and he was lost amongst the needles. Fear filled his gut like a meal he could not digest. He whispered a prayer to the nameless gods of the wood, and slipped his dirk free of its sheath. He put it between his teeth to keep both hands free for climbing, and the taste of cold iron in his mouth gave him comfort. Down below, the lordling called out suddenly, "Who goes there?" Will heard, uncertainty into challenge. He stopped climbing, he listened, he watched. The woods gave answer, the rustling of leaves, the icy rush of a stream, a distant toot of a snow owl. The others made no sound. Will saw movement from the corner of his eye, pale shapes gliding through the wood. He turned his head, glimpsed a white shadow in the darkness, then it was gone. Branches stirred gently in the wind, scratching at one another with wooden fingers. Will opened his mouth to call the warning, and the words seemed to freeze in his throat. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps it had only been a bird, a reflection. On the snow, some trick of the moonlight. What had he seen after all? "Well, where are you?" Sir Waymer called up. "Can you see anything?" He was turning in a slow circle, wary, his sword in his hand. He must have felt them as Will felt them. There was nothing to see. "Answer me. Why is it so cold?" It was cold, shivering. Will clung more tightly to his perch. His face pressed hard against the trunk of the sentinel. He could feel the sweet, sticky sap on his cheek. A shadow emerged from the dark of the wood. It stood in front of Royce. Tall it was, and gaunt, and hard as bones, with flesh pale as milk. Its armour seemed to change colour as it moved. Here it was white as new fallen snow. There, black as shadow. Everywhere dappled with deep grey-green of the trees. The patterns ran like moonlight on water with every step it took. Will heard the breath go to Sir Wimmer Royce in a long hiss. "Come no farther," the lording warned. His voice cracked like a boy's. He threw the long sable cloak back over his shoulders to free his arms for battle, and took his sword in both hands. The wind had stopped. It was very cold. The other slid forward on silent feet. In its hand was a long greatsword, like none that Will had ever seen. No human metal had gone into the forging of that blade. It was alive with moonlight, translucent, a shard of crystal so thin it seemed to almost vanish when seen edge on. There was a faint blue shimmer to the thing, a ghost light that played around its edges, and somehow Will knew it was sharper than any razor. Sir Waymer met him bravely. "Dance with me, then." He lifted his sword high over his head, defiant. His hands trembled from the weight of it, or perhaps from the cold. Yet in that moment Will thought he was a boy no longer, but a man of the night's watch. The other halted. Will saw its eyes, blue, deeper and bluer than any human eyes, a blue that burned like ice. They fixed on the long sword, trembling on high, watched the moonlight running cold along the metal. For a heartbeat he dared to hope. They emerged silently from the shadow, twins to the first, 3 of them, 4 of them, 5. Sir Waymer may have felt the cold that came with them, but he never saw them, never heard them. Will had to call out. It was his duty and his death. If he did, he shivered and hugged the tree and kept the silence. The pale sword came shivering through the air. Sir Waymer met it with steel. When the blades met, there was no ring of metal to metal, only a high, thin sound at the edge of hearing, like an animal screaming in pain. Royce checked, a second blow and a third, then fell back a step. Another flurry of blows, and he fell back again. Behind him, to the right, to the left, all around him, the watchers stood, patient, faceless, silent. The shifting patterns of their delicate armour making them all but invisible in the wood, yet they made no move to interfere. Again and again the swords met until Will wanted to cover his ears against the strange, anguished keening on their clash. Sir Waymer was panting from the effort now, his breath steaming in the moonlight. His blade was white with frost, the others danced with pale blue light. Then Royce's parry came a bit too late. The pale sword bit through the ringmail beneath his arm. The young lord cried out in pain. Blood wells between the rings, it steamed in the cold, and the droplets seemed red as fire where they touched the snow. Sir Waymer's fingers brushed his side. His moleskin glove came away soaked with red. The other said something in a language that Will did not know. His voice was like the crackling of ice and water, and his words were mocking. Sir Wimmer Royce found the fury. "For Robert!" he shouted, and he came up snarling, lifting the frost-covered longsword with both hands and swinging it around in a flat sidearm slash with all his weight behind it. The other's parry was almost lazy. When the blades touched, the steel shattered. A scream echoed through the forest night, and the longsword shivered into 100 brittle pieces, the shards scattering like a rain of needles. Royce went to his knees, shrieking, and covered his eyes. Blood welled between his fingers. The watchers moved forward together, as if some signal had been given.